The sea that morning looked like poured iron, dull, heavy, refusing to shine. A thick, moving fog lay across the channel like an old wool blanket someone had shaken out but forgotten to fold. The British vessel cut through the gray surface slowly, as if trying not to disturb something sleeping beneath. 7 women stood on the deck, pressed against the railing by the wind. They wore simple, worn civilian coats, each tagged on the sleeve with a small paper label that read Transit, Auxiliary Personnel. The guards didn't yell, didn't shove, didn't bark orders. They simply watched, hands on belts, quietly patient. But the women still stood stiff, as if noise or sudden movement could get them struck. They were the survivors of a transport column scattered outside Hamburg. None of them had expected to be shipped to Britain. They had imagined prison, yes, but in Germany, or maybe somewhere in a neutral zone. Britain felt impossibly far, like a country from a book they'd skimmed in school, but never believed they'd see. They didn't know if they were lucky or doomed. Elizabeth Koenig wrapped her fingers around the cold railing. She'd taught Latin and geography before the war. Now she couldn't teach her own hands to stop shaking. Next to her, Inga Weber stood tall, chin raised, jaw set in a defiant line that was more habit than intent. She wasn't rebellious, she just refused to give the enemy the satisfaction of seeing her frightened. Margarita pulled her coat tighter around her body, though the wind bit right through the wool. She'd been crying silently for most of the crossing. The others pretended not to notice. Sympathy felt dangerous. If they softened, they would break. The ship's horn groaned once, the sound low, almost mournful. A British sailor approached them. He wasn't older than 25. "We dock in 10 minutes. His accent was soft, almost apologetic. "When we land, follow instructions closely." Elizabeth swallowed. "Where are we going?" He hesitated, as though the answer wasn't his to give. "To a holding camp. Temporary." "What kind?" Inga asked sharply. "A women's facility. Coastal. Fair conditions." He paused. "You'll see, soon." He walked away, and the 7 POWs exchanged glances. That phrase, "you'll see, soon," could mean anything. The fog began to thin as they approached shore. The outlines of cliffs materialized first, dark, rugged, ancient shapes rising straight from the sea. Then the harbor came into view. Stacks of crates, military trucks, small shacks, guards moving quietly across the docks. The women were led off the ship one by one, stepping onto British soil with the exhausted stiffness of people who hadn't slept in days. A canvas-covered truck waited nearby. Sergeant Collins, tall and neat, greeted them with a small nod. "Ladies, you'll be transported to Newton Cross Women's POW camp. You'll be safe there, provided you follow all camp protocols. Do not stray from the group. Do not speak unless spoken to directly. Keep your hands visible. Understood?" Inga answered for all of them. "Yes." The truck doors shut with a hollow metallic thud. As they were driven inland, the landscape unfolded slowly. Rolling hills, stone walls, scattered sheep, cottages with smoking chimneys. It looked nothing like the war-torn world they'd come from. Too peaceful, too clean, too intact. It made them uneasy, as though peace itself were suspicious. Elizabeth pressed her forehead against the cool wooden slat of the truck. She tried to imagine what British captivity would look like. She'd heard stories, some terrible, some absurdly gentle. No one knew what was true. Rumors survived longer than facts in wartime. The road grew narrower, then rougher. The truck bounced violently, making Margarita clutch the bench. One of the others, Lotte, the Red Cross volunteer, closed her eyes and whispered something like a prayer. Finally, after nearly an hour, the vehicle slowed. "We're here," called a guard from outside. The back doors swung open. The air smelled of damp earth and smoke from wood fires. The camp spread across a small meadow bordered by trees. It didn't look like a prison, more like a rural boarding school someone had forgotten to close. There were rows of wooden cabins with pitched roofs, chimneys, and windows framed by peeling paint. A tall wire fence encircled it all, but even the fence looked strangely polite. A weathered wooden sign read, "Newton Cross, Women's POW Holding Facility, Home Office, Division." The letters were faded, as if they'd been painted before the war even began. The women stepped out hesitantly. A scout woman in a starched uniform approached them. Her hair was pinned in an unimaginably tight bun. A clipboard was clutched under her arm like a weapon. This was the camp matron. She ordered crisply, "Form a line. Hands visible, eyes forward." They complied immediately. "You are being processed. We will conduct medical examinations, inventory all possessions, issue clothing, and assign lodgings. You will follow every instruction precisely." Her tone was flat, but not cruel. Efficient, British to the bone. Then came the moment they dreaded. "You will be inspected," she said, "completely, for security reasons." Margarita gasped softly. Lotte's hands tightened at her sides. Inga didn't move, didn't blink, but her heartbeat sharpened like a knife edge. They were led into a large wooden hall with thin partitions, barely enough to hide a silhouette. The air was cold, smelling of soap and damp timber. British female staff stood ready with clipboards. A male medic lingered near a table with instruments, looking profoundly uncomfortable with his assignment. The matron commanded, "Remove coats." 7 coats dropped to their arms. Boots. 7 pairs of boots scraped the floor. Outer garments. Buttons trembled. Wool slipped to the ground. Including undergarments. Silence cracked like glass. A clerk spoke, trying to soften it. "It's routine, just routine." But routine didn't make the humiliation smaller. Elizabeth stared at a knot in the wooden wall, determined not to cry. Next to her, Margarita turned her face away as tears slipped silently down her jaw. The clerks were professional, polite even, but professionalism didn't make fear vanish. Vulnerability cut deeper than shouting ever could. The guards outside shifted uncomfortably. They could hear the whispers, the soft gasps, the nervous breathing through the thin boards. Private Harris muttered, "We really have to make 'em." Collins answered quietly but firmly. Orders. They might be carrying coded notes, documents, even microfilm. We can't take risks. But they look. I know. Do your job. The inspections were thorough but not invasive.
No one touched more than necessary, no one lingered. It was medical, procedural, cold in its efficiency, but still humiliating. When it was over, the women were given thick gray wool dresses, plain coats, and ankle boots. Every garment was marked with a small number. Their hair was checked again, then tied back. A British nurse handed each of them a steaming mug of tea. She said simply, "It helps." Elizabeth held the mug with both hands, letting the warmth sink into her bones. It didn't erase the humiliation, but it softened the edges. Outside, the camp slowly came into focus.
Women carried firewood, others swept paths. A few hung laundry on lines strung between cabins. Guards watched without aggression, just alertness. The 7 newcomers were shown to Cabin 12, a cramped but warm wooden building with 6 beds and 1 cot hastily added. A small stove glowed in the corner. A single lamp hung from a beam. "This is home," the escort said. The door shut. Silence expanded inside the cabin until it felt physical. Margarita sank onto her bed, shoulders shaking. Lotta placed a hand on her back. Inga stood in the center of the room, stiff as iron. "We survived worse," she said quietly. "We can survive this." But no one answered. Later that evening, a bell rang across the camp. The women stepped outside into the crisp coastal wind. The sky was a soft, bruised purple, clouds glowing faintly from the last traces of sunlight. Roll call. Guard lines. Clipboards. Names read awkwardly by British mouths. Elizabeth corrected her surname's pronunciation gently. Collins nodded, repeating it properly the second time. The small respect surprised her. After roll call came supper. Root stew, coarse bread, and weak tea. It wasn't much, but it was warm. The first night was the hardest. The noises were unfamiliar. Gulls, creaking timbers, distant waves. The wind slipped through gaps in the cabin walls. The stove crackled softly. Lotta lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Marguerite whispered prayers into her blanket. Inga didn't sleep at all. Elizabeth drifted in and out, stuck in memories of classrooms and chalk dust, wondering how a teacher became a prisoner in a foreign land. Above all, there was one shared fear none dared speak aloud. If this is only the beginning, what will the rest of captivity look like? Morning at Newton Cross did not come gently. It came with footsteps, the clatter of buckets, the unmistakable metallic snap of the gates being checked by guards doing their rounds. It came with the sound of gulls crying overhead, as if announcing losses no one had yet counted. It came with cold. The kind of cold that crept through the seams of the wooden cabin, curled around ankles and settled inside bones. Elizabeth sat up on her narrow bed, rubbing her eyes with the heel of her hand. Lotte was already awake, sitting by the small window. Her breath fogged the glass. She traced meaningless shapes in the condensation and whispered something too soft to hear. Inga stood near the stove, adding kindling with calm precision. She had taken it upon herself to be the first to rise, the one who made sure the room was warm before anyone else stirred. She did it without being asked. Leadership wasn't a role she tried to fill, it simply clung to her. Marguerite, wrapped in her blanket like a cocoon, blinked slowly at the ceiling. "Is it morning already?" she whispered weakly.
It never stopped being morning. We only slept through some of it. A sharp knock jolted them. The door opened a heartbeat later. "Roll call, 5 minutes," said Collins, standing in the doorway with his clipboard. His voice was firm, but not unkind. "Dress warmly, rain's coming." He closed the door. Marguerite groaned into her blanket. "Do the British ever sleep?" "No," Inga said. "It's how they won the Navy." Elizabeth snorted, a small, reluctant laugh. Humor was dangerous. It reminded them they were still human. They dressed in their stiff wool uniforms. The garments felt rough against their skin, but they were warm, and that mattered more than dignity in the cold. Outside, the camp stirred slowly. Huts exhaled smoke from chimneys. Guards marched with measured steps. A group of Polish women carried buckets toward the laundry hut, their boots crunching on gravel. Roll call happened in the center square. Names echoed through the chilly air. Weber, Koenig, Meyer, Richter, Thal, Hoffman, Stahl. 7 women, 7 shadows in the morning mist. After roll call, they were led to breakfast. Porridge the consistency of glue, bread tough enough to crack teeth if one wasn't careful, and tea that tasted faintly of metal. It wasn't good, but it was food. And food was another reminder. Britain didn't starve its prisoners. That felt strange, suspicious. Elizabeth turned her mug slowly. "Why are they kind?" she whispered. "They're not kind. They're methodical. Efficiency feels like kindness when you've been through chaos." The others nodded. After breakfast came work assignments. Elizabeth and Lotte were assigned to the literacy hut, a small, crooked building filled with mismatched chairs and stacks of worn books. Their job was to reorganize supplies for POWs from Eastern Europe who couldn't read English. It felt surreal to be surrounded by books while wearing a prisoner's uniform. Marguerite and Helga were assigned to the laundries, where steam filled the air and made the women's hair cling damply to their cheeks. The Polish POWs there worked quickly and silently. They nodded politely, but rarely spoke. Inga and Greta were sent to chop kindling. A British corporal demonstrated with the precision of a man who'd been splitting wood since birth. "Mind your fingers," he said, eyes narrowing pointedly at Greta, who held the axe like it was a dangerous animal. She swallowed hard. "I've never chopped wood." "You'll learn," Inga said, taking the first swing. The sound cracked like a gunshot. The day stretched out, not arduous, but draining. The women moved through tasks mechanically, each moment reminding them they were no longer part of the world they once understood. When midday came, clouds thickened overhead. The sea wind picked up, carrying the promise of rain. Guards handed out rough canvas ponchos to the POWs. "It'll be a nasty one this afternoon," Collins said as he passed by. "Stay near the huts when you're done. The roads get flooded easily." The women nodded. The storm hit suddenly. By the time they sprinted back to cabin 12, the sky had broken open. Rain hammered the roofs. Water rushed between the huts in small rivers. The camp turned into a glistening maze of puddles. Inside, the women gathered around the stove, shaking off ponchos. Marguerite shivered violently. "I thought England was supposed to be civilized." "This is civilized," Elizabeth said. "Imagine this storm in a foxhole." Marguerite went quiet. The rain roared for hours, drowning every other sound. The stove hissed under the assault of damp air. In the flickering light, the 7 women looked strangely united, not by friendship, but by shared captivity. Evening settled slowly. Supper time came and went. The storm finally weakened to a steady drizzle. And just when the cabin began to fall into an uneasy quiet, the first transport arrived. The sound of engines cut through the air like a saw. Headlights pierced the rain. Trucks rolled through the gates. More women. Dozens. Mud-streaked, loud, defiant, furious. These weren't auxiliaries like the original 7. Many had been factory workers in occupied France. Others were from Signal Corps groups. Some had been captured while fleeing. All were angry. As the guards led them into the yard, shouts erupted. "Where are we? What are these huts? Why are men guarding us? We demand proper treatment." One woman in the new group, tall, blonde, coat torn at the sleeve, shouted in perfect English, "We will not undress for you. We refuse." Her voice rang across the entire camp. Even the original 7 froze. Collins stepped forward, rain dripping from the brim of his cap. "You will follow inspection protocols. No exceptions." "We refuse!" someone screamed again. Chaos threatened to erupt. The matron appeared, soaked but unyielding. "You will comply, immediately." "No!" Voices grew louder. Defiance spread like fire. And then, cutting through the shouts, came a voice the guards didn't expect. Inga's. She stepped out from the front of the original group, her shoulders squared, rain trickling down her hair. "Enough!" The yard fell quiet. Not silent, but quiet enough to hear her next words clearly. "You are making this harder for all of us. They are not hurting us. They follow rules. Follow them back and this will pass quickly." The new arrivals glared at her as if she'd betrayed them. "You let them humiliate you?" one snarled. "No," Inga said calmly. "I let them keep me alive." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Collins nodded subtly, grateful. The matron barked orders. The inspection resumed, rougher now, more chaotic, but still controlled. The original 7 returned to their hut. The new prisoners were scattered into cabins. That night, the storm passed, but tension lingered like smoke. Cabin 12 was quiet. Even Inga lay down heavily, as though the confrontation had drained her. Elizabeth whispered, "Do you think they'll settle?" "No," Inga replied. "Not yet. They just arrived angry." Marguerite hugged her knees. "What about us?" "We arrived frightened," Inga said. "There's a difference." It was impossible to sleep. The new POWs shouted across cabins. Arguments erupted. Doors slammed. Guards marched more frequently. Hours dragged. At some point after midnight, rain began again. Softer this time, like someone tapping gently at the roof. Elizabeth lay awake listening to it. "Maybe tomorrow will be calmer," she whispered into the dark. But the next day was not calmer. It was stranger.
The British staff had underestimated how disruptive the new group would be. They questioned every command. They refused chores. They argued during roll call. They mocked the uniforms, the food, even the accents of the guards. By midday, tempers were fraying everywhere. A guard snapped at a prisoner. A prisoner snapped back. Fists nearly flew at one point, until Collins intervened, voice like steel. But something unexpected began happening too. The original 7 became a stabilizing force. They weren't leaders by choice, but caregivers by experience. They translated, explained, softened orders, cooled tempers. They became the quiet glue holding Newton Cross together. Inga confronted 2 factory girls who tried to steal blankets. Elizabeth mediated a fight over chores. Lottie comforted a crying newcomer who wanted to go home. Greta stopped a shouting match between Polish and German women in the laundry. The guards noticed, Collins especially. Late that afternoon, he approached the 7 outside cabin 12. "I want to thank you," he said quietly. "We didn't expect this many arrivals at once. You handling the new group the way you did, it prevented a full mutiny." Inga crossed her arms. "We didn't do it for you." "I know," Collins said. "That's why I'm thanking you." The women didn't respond. In captivity, a thank you felt dangerous, like an invitation to let down their guard. No one wanted to be the first to accept it. But the real turning point came that evening. It was sunset. The sky glowed a bruised orange. The air smelled of wet wood and sea salt. Elizabeth was returning from the literacy hut when she passed one of the newly arrived women sitting alone on a step. The woman hugged her soaking coat around herself, staring blankly at the mud. Elizabeth hesitated, then approached. "Cold?" The woman blinked slowly. "Yes." "You can borrow one of our blankets." A long silence. Finally, "Why?" Elizabeth shrugged gently. "We were new once too." For the first time, the woman's expression softened. Elizabeth walked away before she could second-guess her own kindness. That night, the camp felt ever so slightly less volatile. Not peaceful, not calm, but no longer on the edge of eruption. Inside cabin 12, as the women settled under their blankets, Inga whispered, "We can survive this, all of us." No one argued. Outside, the wind shifted direction, carrying the faintest smell of blooming heath, a reminder that spring was coming, even in captivity. And for the first time since arriving, Elizabeth allowed herself to believe that the next day might be bearable. Maybe even something close to normal, if war allowed such things. Dawn crept into Newton Cross like a timid guest, brushing pale light across the soaked wooden walls. The storm had passed, but the ground still glistened with puddles. The cabins looked older than the day before, as if 3 waves of new prisoners had aged them by months. But the air felt lighter, not calm, but no longer trembling with tension. Elizabeth awoke to the murmur of distant voices, not arguments, not shouting, normal conversation. Quiet, subdued, almost domestic. Strange how quickly normalcy could return after chaos, like a wild animal retreating into the trees. She slipped from her bunk, stretching stiff muscles. Lotte lay curled on her side, breathing softly. Greta snored lightly on the cot by the stove. Even Inga, who had barely slept since arriving, seemed to be resting more deeply, her face calm for the first time in days. Elizabeth opened the door a crack. Mist curled low across the yard. Guards paced along the fence, their boots leaving dark impressions in the mud. A line of women, some from the new group, headed toward the mess hall with buckets for morning rations. The camp looked like a place trying to remember how to breathe. A bell rang sharply, echoing off the wooden walls. Roll call. The 7 original women formed up quickly. Behind them shuffled the newer prisoners, exhausted, irritable, but quieter than yesterday. Defiance had burned away some of their energy. Hunger and cold had done the rest. Sergeant Collins walked down the line, taking names. He paused for a heartbeat when he reached Inga, giving her a subtle nod. She returned it, expression unreadable. When the ceremony ended, the matron stepped forward. As the new prisoners integrate, we will resume regular schedules. Chores must be completed on time. Infractions will be noted, but cooperation will be recognized. You are responsible for one another. Her gaze swept across the yard like a blade. I expect this camp to function properly, starting today. The women dispersed. Elizabeth and Lotte returned to the literacy hut, now crowded with new arrivals. Books sat in haphazard stacks, many opened to pages with ink smudges from damp fingers. A Polish woman approached Elizabeth with a dictionary, pointing helplessly at a block of English text. Elizabeth smiled faintly and began translating as best she could, though her Polish was limited to short phrases. They found common ground in German words. It felt strange, enemy languages becoming bridges instead of walls. Outside, the sky thickened with low clouds, but for once, no rain came. In the laundry hut, steam rose in warm waves. Greta wrung out sheets with another woman, their hands reddened from the hot water. Margarita sorted uniforms, folding them with meticulous care, as if order itself could calm her nerves. Inga stood by the woodpile with an axe in her hands. Collins approached, watching her split logs with powerful, precise strokes. "You're good at that," he remarked. "It's not difficult," she replied without looking up. "Still," he said, "many struggle with it. You've taken to everything quickly." Inga paused, her jaw tensing. "We adapt. That's what prisoners do." Collins nodded once and walked away. As the morning progressed, a new rhythm formed in the camp. The newly arrived women watched the original 7 carefully, not with distrust now, but with curiosity. Yesterday's resistance had been born of fear, not true conviction. Today, fear remained, but something else had taken root. A desire to understand how to survive here. And the 7 had, in their quiet way, figured out how to. At midday, a rare sight appeared on the camp road. A Red Cross truck. It stopped just inside the gates, and 2 British officers stepped out to meet the driver. A British nurse unloaded crates, medical supplies, blankets, and something the prisoners had not seen in months. Rumors spread instantly. The Red Cross had come for an inspection. That meant the camp would be at its best behavior, and it meant someone might listen. Elizabeth stood near the fence with Lotte, watching the proceedings from a distance. A Red Cross representative, tall, with thin glasses and an expression that suggested permanent concern, entered the administrative building with the matron. "They're evaluating conditions," Lotte murmured. "They'll see what the British want them to see," Elizabeth replied softly. She wasn't bitter, just realistic. Inside cabin 12, the air smelled faintly of apples, a scent that nearly made Margarita cry. The Red Cross had distributed 1 piece of fruit per woman. It wasn't much, but it was enough to jolt memories of home kitchens, summer markets, childhood picnics. For a few moments, they weren't prisoners, just women holding apples. Elizabeth turned hers carefully, then offered half to Margarita. "You need it more." "No," Margarita whispered, pushing it back. "We share."
They split it 7 ways. Inga ate her slice silently, her eyes distant. That afternoon, the camp was quieter than usual. Guards avoided shouting. The matron moved briskly, but without her usual edge. Everything was neater, more orderly, scrubbed clean for inspection. But beneath the surface, tension simmered. The newly arrived women hadn't fully adjusted yet. Many resented the first 7 for finding their footing so quickly. Resentment brewed in whispered insults, cold glances, small provocations. The breaking point came just before evening. At the laundry hut, an argument erupted between 2 factory workers and Greta. The women accused her of taking more than her share of blankets, a lie born of frustration, not fact. "You saw you," one woman shouted. "No, you didn't," Greta replied, her voice trembling. "Do you think you can order us around because you've been here longer?" "I don't order anyone, Greta." The taller woman shoved her. Greta stumbled backward into a tub of steaming water, gasping as hot water splashed her arms. She cried out in pain. Margarita screamed her name from the doorway. Before guards could intervene, Inga arrived, drawn by the noise. She stepped between Greta and the aggressors, eyes sharp, posture coiled like a spring. "Enough." The 2 factory workers glared defiantly. "Move," one spat. "No." The word cut the air. Inga didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her stare alone froze the women in place. "You want to fight?" she asked quietly. "Then fight me, not her." Silence spread across the laundry. Greta trembled, clutching her scalded arm. The 2 factory workers hesitated. Their anger wavered, replaced by something like doubt. Inga stood calm, ready, utterly unafraid. Finally, one muttered, "She's not worth it." The others scoffed, though less sure of herself than before. They walked away. Inga knelt beside Greta. "Let me see," she murmured. Greta's skin was red and blistering. Without waiting for permission, Inga lifted her and carried her to the infirmary. Collins saw them arrive. What happened? An accident. But Collins saw the truth in her eyes. He didn't push it. The nurse treated Greta's burns with cool ointment, wrapping her arm gently. "You'll be fine. Painful, but fine." Greta nodded weakly. Outside, rain began again. Softer than the storm, but cold. Inga and Collins stood under the infirmary awning. "You protected her," he said. "I protect my own," she replied simply.
Collins studied her for a long moment. "You know, not all British soldiers agree with the rules here. Some of us think this place should be managed differently, more humanely." Inga didn't respond. He continued, voice low, "You should know that not everyone sees you as enemies." Inga turned her gaze to the yard, where prisoners dragged buckets, where guards walked their routes, where mud clung to boots like a second skin. "I don't need anyone to see me as a friend. Just let us survive this place." Collins nodded slowly. "I can do that." Evening approached. The Red Cross truck departed. The camp returned to its normal state, less polished, more tense but functional. Women whispered about the inspection, about Greta's injury, about Inga stepping forward. Inside cabin 12, Lotta helped Greta lie down on her cot. Marguerite brought her water. Elizabeth wrapped an extra blanket around her shoulders. Greta whispered, "Thank you, all of you." Inga sat quietly near the stove. Elizabeth looked at her. "You didn't have to intervene." "I know." "You could have been hurt." "I know." "So why did you?" Inga didn't lift her head. "Because no one else would." The stove crackled softly. The rain pattered gently against the roof. The 7 women sat in the dim glow, breathing in the fragile peace of the moment. Outside, the camp's noise faded into a distant hum. Inside, they were no longer 7 strangers thrown together by war. They were becoming something else. Not friends, not family, but a unit. A small, quiet, stubborn unit that refused to fracture. And as the night deepened, Elizabeth realized something she hadn't allowed herself to think before. They might actually survive this, not just physically, but as people. Even in captivity, even behind fences, even in a foreign land, survival sometimes looked like this: a group of women sitting close to a stove, sharing warmth, sharing silence, refusing to break. By the 4th week at Newton Cross, the camp had settled into a strange rhythm. Not peace, not routine, but something in between, like an orchestra tuning their instruments before the real performance begins. Every day felt as though something important hovered just outside the fence, about to break through, but never quite arriving. Elizabeth felt the change most in the mornings. She woke earlier without prompting. The cabin no longer felt like a prison cell, but like a place she had begun mapping with invisible markers. The creaking floorboard near her bed, the window latch that stuck, the smell of damp wool mingling with wood smoke. These small landmarks grounded her. Greta's burns were healing. She still winced when the bandages were changed, but she walked confidently to breakfast now, and the others always formed a protective circle around her, unconsciously shielding her from the women who had pushed her. Those 2 kept their distance. Outside, the air had begun to carry the first hints of spring. Not warmth yet, but less biting cold, a softer wind, the occasional birdsong from the distant trees. Even the mud looked different, thinner, lighter, less like a trap and more like part of the landscape. After roll call that morning, the matron announced new assignments. Due to increased occupation of the camp, we will reorganize labor responsibilities. Some of you will move to sanitation, others to field maintenance. Her gaze landed briefly on the 7 original women. You 7 will oversee cabin order for blocks A through C. A murmur spread among the newer prisoners. Leadership positions among POWs were always delicate. They could be interpreted as betrayal or survival. Inga felt every pair of eyes on them. "We didn't ask for this," she whispered to Elizabeth. "I know, but refusing would make everything worse." The assignment wasn't power, it was responsibility. Checking beds, verifying supplies, managing arguments, ensuring no one stole blankets or bread or soap. A kind of internal governance. British guards preferred when prisoners policed themselves. Collins approached them quietly afterward. "For what it's worth, you're good at holding this place together." "We're good at surviving," Inga corrected him. "Same skill?" he answered. By midday, tensions had eased. Even the factory women who'd caused the fight looked embarrassed when the 7 passed by. In the laundry, steam rose in thick columns. Inga's new role meant she supervised rather than worked, making sure each woman rotated fairly around the steaming tubs. Some resented it, most didn't care. They were too tired to fight. Marguerite, sorting clothes, whispered to Inga, Why do you think they trust us? Because we don't want trouble, and that makes us useful, Inga murmured. Marguerite swallowed hard. I don't want to be useful. I want to go home. Inga didn't answer. Home was a dangerous topic, too fragile to touch. Elizabeth's shift in the literacy hut brought its own challenges. The arrival of French, Polish, and Czech prisoners had turned the small room into a multilingual whirlpool. She found herself translating into combinations of German, halting French, and improvised gestures. It was exhausting, but oddly fulfilling. Teaching reminded her of the person she had been before the war reshaped her into something sharper. At lunch, the 7 gathered at a table near the wall. They rarely had privacy, but they created the illusion of it by sitting close, shoulders brushing. Greta said quietly, "Someone left bread at my door this morning." "Who?" Lottie asked. Greta shrugged. "I didn't see, but it wasn't one of you." This was new. Unexpected kindness inside captivity always felt like an omen. Inga narrowed her eyes slightly. It could be someone trying to gain favor. Elizabeth shook her head. Or someone feeling guilty. Greta touched the bandages on her arm. "I'll take either." The afternoon brought a different kind of uproar. A British intelligence officer arrived. Not a guard, not a medic. A tall man in a dark overcoat walking as if the entire camp were beneath his notice. He entered the administrative building with 2 MPs behind him. The matron followed, expression neutral, but jaw tightening. Whispers tore through the camp like wind through dry grass. Who is he? Why is intelligence here? Are they interviewing people? Has someone escaped? The 7 women exchanged uneasy glances. Later that evening, the matron assembled all prisoners in the yard. An inquiry will be conducted over the next week. Some of you will be summoned for questioning. Cooperate fully. Her tone was clipped and colder than usual. After she dismissed them, women murmured nervously while returning to their cabins. Inside cabin 12, fear rippled through the group. "What kind of inquiry?" Marguerite asked, twisting her blanket between trembling fingers. "No idea," Elizabeth replied, sitting on her bunk. "But intelligence officers don't come for routine checks." "Do you think someone did something? Someone from the new group?" "Probably," Inga said. "The timing fits." "What if they question us?" Lottie whispered. "They will," Inga said calmly. "We're leadership now. They'll want our impressions." That didn't reassure anyone. The next 3 days were tense. Women were called into the administrative building one by one. Some returned pale. Others refused to speak of what was asked. The guards offered no explanation. The intelligence officer rarely emerged except to smoke outside while the wind snapped at his coat. On the 4th day, the 7 originals were summoned. Together. That alone was unusual. Inside the building, the air felt colder, stiller. The smell of paper and ink lay heavy. The intelligence officer sat at a table, hands folded, eyes the color of slate. He gestured for them to stand in a line. "I'm Major Rutherford. I am here to investigate an incident concerning missing correspondence from a transport convoy captured near Bremen." Correspondence. Letters. Elizabeth felt a chill. The major continued. Among the seized documents was evidence that members of an auxiliary column may have attempted to smuggle coded messages through Red Cross channels. We have reason to believe someone here knew of it or participated. The 7 women stiffened. "We had no involvement," Inga immediately said. "Perhaps, but I need statements." He questioned them one by one. Not aggressively, just methodically. He asked them about the days before their transport,
about interactions with other auxiliaries, about items confiscated upon arrival, about letters, about names, about conversations overheard. He asked Elizabeth about her teaching background. He asked Lottie about her Red Cross experience. He asked Greta where she learned to speak a little English. He asked Inga about leadership structures among auxiliaries. Nothing overtly threatening, but every question held hooks. After nearly an hour, he dismissed them. "You may go, but remain available." As they exited the building, Colin stood nearby, watching them with muted concern. "Did he accuse you of anything?" he asked quietly. "No, but he suspects everyone," Elizabeth said. "That's his job. But you seven, you're not troublemakers. You're the closest thing to stability this camp has." "Stability can be a target," Inga said. Collins hesitated. "I'll keep an eye out. Don't wander alone." Back at Cabin 12, the women were shaken, though they hid it in different ways. Lottie folded and refolded her blanket. Greta sat on her bed, staring at the floor. Marguerite bit her nails until they bled. Inga stood by the door, arms crossed, watching over them like a sentinel. The next morning, the matron's investigation escalated. 2 factory women were pulled from their cabin and marched across the yard. One screamed accusations the entire way. "It wasn't me! She told me to! She told me to carry it! I didn't even know what was in the envelope!" Her cries echoed long after the doors slammed behind her. That evening, guards posted at all cabin doors. No one was allowed out except for necessities. The sky darkened early, heavy clouds swallowing what little daylight remained. Inside Cabin 12, the 7 sat around the stove again, the small fire flickering shadows across their faces. The air felt thick, like something important was about to break. Marguerite whispered, "What if they punish the whole camp?" "They won't," Inga said calmly. "They'll isolate the responsible ones." "And if they don't find them?" Greta asked. "They will," Inga replied. "Desperation makes people talk."
Elizabeth stared into the flames. "I don't like this. Before, survival was simple. Follow rules, stay quiet, stay out of trouble. Now it feels like we're all being pulled into something." "We're not," Inga said firmly. "We keep our heads down. We follow orders. We stay together." Her certainty steadied them. But the peace was fragile. Very fragile. The turning point came 2 nights later. The guards discovered a hidden compartment beneath Cabin 13, a space carved into the floorboards, just big enough to hide small packages. There were traces of paper scraps, wax seals, and a piece of fabric torn from a Red Cross bag. Rutherford's expression darkened. That night, alarms blared. Floodlights snapped on. MPs stormed the yard, shouting everywhere. Women dragged out of cabins. Chaos. Cabin 12 stayed silent inside, frozen. Boots thundered outside their door, then stopped, then moved on. The 7 exhaled shakily. Hours passed. Finally, the noise died down. The camp fell silent again. The next morning, 2 women were gone. "Transferred," the guards said. "Taken," the rumors whispered. The investigation ended abruptly. The tension did not. Inside Cabin 12, the 7 sat in exhausted quiet. Greta finally spoke. "What now?" Elizabeth looked at the door. "At least the worst seems over." Inga didn't answer immediately. She gazed through the window, where guards walked slowly along the fence, their silhouettes blurring in the fog. Then she said quietly, "No, the worst is coming. I can feel it." Her voice held no fear, just truth. And the others knew she was right. Something was coming. Something none of them were prepared for.
The worst did not arrive as thunder or shouting or more raids from intelligence. It came quietly, folded inside an ordinary morning, disguised as routine. A week passed after the investigation ended. The camp remained more guarded than before, but the alarms stopped. No more random cabin searches at midnight. No more prisoners dragged across the yard in handcuffs. The floodlights returned to their usual schedule, flickering on at dusk and off at dawn. Life slid back into its brittle version of normal. The 7 women resumed their duties, overseeing cabin order, smoothing conflicts, translating instructions. The new arrivals, chastened by the vanished factory women and the brief, terrifying crackdown, kept their voices lower now. Defiance remained in their eyes, but not on their lips. Inga still woke before everyone else. Elizabeth still spent her afternoons surrounded by books. Greta's burns faded into pale scars. Lota mended clothes in her free time, hands moving with practiced grace. Margaretha counted the days on a scrap of paper hidden beneath her mattress. Helga prayed silently each night. Clara, the quietest of them, began singing under her breath when she hung laundry, soft melodies from before the war. And yet, despite this fragile rhythm, there was a sense, especially for Inga, that they were standing on a narrow bridge between 2 unknowing shores. The announcement came on a Tuesday. The sky was unusually clear, a washed-out blue stretching over the camp like a thin fabric. After roll call, the matron and Collins stood together in front of the assembled prisoners. That alone signaled something important. The matron spoke first. "By order of the Home Office and War Office," she said, her clipboard held like a shield, "a selection of prisoners will be transferred from Newton Cross to agricultural labor programs in the interior." Whispers rippled through the ranks. Transfer. The word tasted like both hope and threat. "You will be assigned to farms and estates in need of labor. You will remain under supervision, but with expanded movement and improved housing. Good conduct is required. Any attempts to escape will be punished according to standing regulations." She paused, then glanced at her list. The first group will depart within 48 hours. Every heart in the yard seemed to skip a beat. Collins stepped forward. He said, "The following prisoners are included in the first transfer." He read names. Most of them were from the newer arrivals. Women exhaled in relief or gasped in disbelief as they heard or didn't hear themselves called. Then he read, Weber, König, Meyer, Richter, Tal, Hoffman, Stoll. 7 names in a row. The original 7. Inga felt her chest tighten. Margarita almost dropped where she stood. Greta's bandaged hand curled into a fist. Inga didn't move. She just stared ahead, eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the fence. Collins finished. Those listed will report to the administrative office at 1600 hours today for briefing and documentation.
The assembly was dismissed. Women scattered, some celebrating quietly, others consoling those who remained. The camp suddenly felt like two camps overlapping each other, those leaving and those staying behind. Inside cabin 12, the atmosphere was electric. Margarita paced back and forth between bunks.
Farms, she muttered. Real houses, fields, maybe proper sheets, maybe fresh food, maybe more work than we've ever done, Greta said carefully. We don't know. It has to be better than this, Marguerite insisted. It has to. Lotta sat on the edge of her bed, fingers twisting the hem of her blanket. Do you think it's safe? Elizabeth responded before Inga could. Safe compared to what? Bombs? Transports? Oceans? We're still prisoners, just prisoners with better scenery. Helga smiled faintly. I'll take better scenery. Inga remains near the stove, shoulders squared, arms crossed. She looked like she'd been carved from the same wood as the cabin. What are you thinking? Elizabeth asked her quietly. That this is too sudden, Inga replied. We become useful here. Camps don't like to let go of what makes them run smoothly. Maybe that's exactly why we're being moved, Elizabeth said, quietly. Maybe they want cooperative prisoners to set examples elsewhere. Or they want to scatter us so we can't hold together. The thought cast a shadow over all of them. What if they split us up? Greta whispered. Silence. No one wanted to imagine it. At 1600 hours, they reported to the administrative building as ordered. Collins stood outside, holding his clipboard, expression more rigid than usual. Inside, the matron waited behind a table, stacks of papers arranged in neat piles. Major Rutherford was gone. In his place was a civilian official in a dark suit, his tie slightly crooked. He cleared his throat. You have been selected, he said, for transfer to a Home Office agricultural rehabilitation scheme. You will be sent to farms across the region to perform necessary labor. You will live under guarded yet less restrictive conditions. Your behavior here contributed to your selection. Elizabeth felt an odd twist in her stomach at that word, behavior. Survival had become performance, judged and rewarded. The official continued. You will not be separated. You will remain as a group. He glanced at the matron's notes. Command believes you function well as a unit. Relief washed through the seven like a wave. Together. Still together. That mattered more than where they were sent. He slid forms across the table. You will sign these, he said, acknowledging the conditions of your transfer. They will be read aloud if you do not fully understand. Inga scanned the document quickly. It contained no promises of release, no guarantees of fair treatment, only obligations. Work hours, curfews, reporting protocols. But it did contain one thing, a line that stated that successful completion of the program would be considered favorably in future repatriation decisions. A thin line, but enough. Inga signed. One by one, the others followed. Afterwards, Collins escorted them outside. I assume this is good news? Marguerite almost laughed. Assume? It's the best news we've had since everything. He nodded, but something in his face remained tight. Good conduct on the farms will matter. Supervisors will report on you. Make them proud. Is that what you want? Inga asked him.
I want you to see something other than fences, he said quietly. "If I can't send you home, I can at least get you past this wire." For the first time since arriving, the idea of the world beyond the fence felt real. Not an enemy, not an abstract. A road, a field, a farmhouse that smelled of hay and animals and work and possibly something resembling life. Their last full day at Newton Cross felt strangely bright. The guards allowed them extra time to pack what little they owned. Other prisoners came by, some to say farewell, others just to look at the women who were leaving. It was impossible not to feel guilty for going while so many stayed. A Polish woman hugged Lotte. "Teach them," she said in broken German. "Like you teach us." Lotte nodded, eyes shining. Greta received an awkward handshake from one of the factory women involved in the laundry incident. No apology was spoken, but regret hung in the air. Helga exchanged a rosary bead with a Czech woman she'd prayed alongside for weeks. "Pray for both of us," the woman whispered. "In every language," Helga replied. Inga walked the perimeter of the yard one last time, memorizing the lines of the fence, the watchtower's angle, the hut roof's sagging slopes. To most, Newton Cross was a cage. To her, it had been a test, and they had passed it. That night, the seven sat crowded around the stove, their last fire in cabin 12. "No matter what happens," Elizabeth said softly, "we remember this place, not as punishment, as proof." "Proof of what?" Greta asked. "That we were more than numbers," Elizabeth answered. Inga added, "and that we held together." No one argued. They slept lightly, half afraid of missing the departure, half afraid it might be canceled. The truck arrived just after dawn. The guards formed up. The matron stood unusually straight, her usual severity tempered by something like respect. "You have conducted yourselves acceptably," she said, as though the word cost her effort. "Do not make me regret signing your transfer approvals." Marguerite almost smiled. "We won't, Frau Matron," she said, deliberately using the German title. For once, no one scolded her. Collins opened the truck's back. One by one, the seven climbed in. Before closing the doors, Collins met Inga's eyes. "Good luck," he said quietly, "wherever they send you." She held his gaze. "You keep this place from becoming a nightmare." "I try," he replied. The doors shut. The engine rumbled. As the truck pulled away, the women peered through the narrow slats of the wooden frame. Newton Cross grew smaller behind them. The fence, the huts, the yard where they'd stood in the rain, the laundry hut where Greta had been burned, the literacy hut where Elizabeth had tried to mend more than just pages. It all faded slowly into the mist. They did not speak for a long time. The road wound through hills, past scattered farms and stone walls, past small villages that looked untouched by war. The world outside captivity moved at its own pace, indifferent, almost oblivious. At some point, Marguerite broke the silence. "Do you think we'll remember every detail?" she asked. "No," Elizabeth said. "Memory doesn't work that way." "What will we remember, then?" Lotte answered, "The worst parts, and the choice we made not to let them be the only parts." The truck hit a bump, jolting them. Greta laughed softly. "Listen to us. We sound like old women already." "We are old. Not in years, in miles." The others nodded. The journey took hours.
Eventually, they turned down a narrow lane bordered by hedges. A farmhouse appeared atop a low hill surrounded by fields just waking from winter. Smoke curled from a wide chimney. Chickens pecked near a fence. A man in a flat cap stood by the gate watching the truck approach with wary eyes. "This is it," Collins called from outside. "First stop." The truck halted. The doors opened. Cold air rushed in, but it smelled different here. Not of the sea and wet wood, but of soil, animals, and something like possibility. "Off you go," Collins said. The 7 climbed out, boots crunching on gravel. A civilian official greeted them. "You'll be housed in the workers' quarters. You'll work the fields, help with livestock, assist in the household when needed. You'll be guarded, but not locked in cabins. If you behave, we won't have trouble." "Will there be more like us?" Elizabeth asked. "In time," he said. "But for now you're the first." Inga looked over her shoulder as though half expecting the fence of Newton Cross to appear again, but the only lines here were hedges and distant hills. For the first time in months, there was no barbed wire within arm's reach. They walked toward the workers' hut, a low building with a slanted roof and smoke swishing from a crooked chimney. Inside were simple beds, a wide table, hooks for coats, and a stove already glowing faintly. It wasn't freedom, but it wasn't Newton Cross. That night, as they lay in unfamiliar beds, listening to the sounds of farm life, a dog barking, a cow lowing, the rustle of wind through nearby trees, the 7 women turned, one by one, to face each other in the dim light. "If we survive this," Marguerite whispered, "and we go home one day, will anyone believe us when we talk about this place, about Newton Cross, about all of it?" "No," Elizabeth said gently. "Not all of it. People only believe the parts that fit the stories they already tell themselves." "Then why remember it?" "Because we were there," Inga said. "And if we don't remember, no one will know how many ways there are to survive a war." They fell silent again. Outside, the sky was clear. Stars shone over a foreign land. Years later, long after the fences were torn down, long after ships carried prisoners back across calmer seas, long after children with curious eyes asked questions about the war, the 7 women would carry Newton Cross inside them, like a scar only they could see. They would remember humiliation and kindness woven so tightly together they were hard to separate. They would remember fear and small acts of courage. They would remember the day they arrived in silence and the day they left, not as heroes or victims, but as something war rarely allowed people to be, simply human, still together, still here.